I'm here to present to you our research paper, our short paper, Trap of Time, Historical Common Names to Modern Taxonomy Mapping Using Large Language Models. I'm Jan Filius. I'm from the Institute of Applied Computer Science in Leipzig and from the Freie Universität Berlin in Germany also. Yeah, in Berlin. There are quite a lot of co-authors. I'm really happy that we had a big collaboration on this, especially for a short paper. It seems a lot, but we had cooperations from the general state archives in Munich, in Bavaria, in Germany. We also had somebody from the Universität Passau there. We had somebody from the Animal and Farm Animal Biology Institute in Dammersdorf and the Botanical Garden here in Berlin and the Fraunhofer Focus in Berlin. A lot of people, but as we are hoping to advance further after this introductional short little step into this world, I hope it will be followed by a long paper, hopefully also at a great space like you are offering here for us. So what I might just, oops, sorry, I have to change slides. Yes, just to give a little bit more advertising for ourselves, we are part of the NFDI, which is a research data infrastructure project here in Germany. We at the Institute in Leipzig are providing BioDiff Portal, which is a portal for ontologies and taxonomies. So in case anybody is working within the field or working within something related, we host ontologies for your projects to standardize your research data, basically, and whatever else you can think of where you want to use ontologies. We offer many more things. We offer ontology mapping. We have a little annotator. We have ontology recommender if you find new terms and are not sure which ontology would fit best for you. But we do also fairness assessment of ontologies in general. So in case you want, please come to us. We are always looking for research collaborations. As part of this NFDE research project, we found a problem. We found a problem that we're hoping to address within this research, and this is historical biodiversity data. So there is a lot of historical biodiversity data out there, and luckily, as we are becoming a more digitalized society, more of these texts are getting machine readable. Now, the next step is, after we actually digitalized it, how can we integrate that into our biodiversity research landscape? So, for example, just because in this text you see on the left, we're lucky in this case, it's even already like printed and not handwritten, but we also will see a handwritten example soon. In this printed example, they're talking about species. So, for example, they're talking about a Trappe, and just because it is that's a certain bird in German, basically, and just because this bird was named in a common or in a scientific way, Trappe in the 19th century does not mean, of course, that it is still that, and that concept is still connected to that concept which we have today. So we want to make these historical texts accessible, which means we need to understand how these terms have changed and how do we map them directly to modern scientific or modern common day terms to make also historical data findable, accessible, interpretable, and reliable, and enrich us with this long history of data collection that has happened in a non-so-standardized way. So our approach here, our first little step, is to use large language models for this, as we will see with some interesting results. So yes. So we worked with the documents down, a document down there, which was collected from Grapevine et al. In 2024. I will introduce it later. That's actually a handwritten text, which then was digitalized. And while working with this document, we found three common challenges in this mapping of the historical terms to the to the modern day terms. So the first ones are spelling variations. As you can see here, it's a quite simple example. The only difference here is one H. So Murmeltier, the German name for marmot, was spelled historically with an H, and today it's not anymore. So this H got lost, and you think, okay, that's a minor little thing that could be also just a misspelling. We see it is more of a general structural problem that needs to be addressed if we want to directly find these entities in modern day taxonomies or ontologies. The second one is discontinued or involved common names. A short introduction: what is a common name? For the people who don't know, a common name is just the colloquial way to talk about a species. So what we say, that's a crow today, has of course then the scientific or Latin, mostly Latin translation. So common name is just the way we talk about it in our a common understanding. And we have the problem with that just as everything in language, those names are also not static, so they evolve. So for example, in the 19th century, people were referring to the Steinkrähe in Bavaria in Germany, which is a form of crow or bird in general, or Alpenkopf. But today the name has changed to the Alpendole, and this is a very specific knowledge because this is not the scientific name changing, but the common name that people refer to this animal, which is which is a very expert knowledge that you need to have to understand. Oh, this is not a form. This is not a form of specific. This is a form of specific historical change in common name. And yeah, so on that level, a lot of insider knowledge is needed. And in the third process, we also have the same, of course, for scientific problems. So scientific names. So also the scientific names change. In this case, they often get redefined. So while these names, they can also disappear, of course, but they are way more frequent is that they, for example, they split. So we have one broad concept, and we discover a subspecies, and it gets more finely defined and gets a new name. So we see these are the three. There are many more challenges. We assume these are the three main challenges we identified in our data set, and which we tried to address within our research. So what data set did we actually use? We used a data set made available by Rehbein et al. In 2024, and it is collected it was collected by subordians of the Bavarian king in 1845. This king said, I want to know what kind of species are in my forest, please go and collect. And then he gave them a list of 45 species he's interested in, and his subordinates then went into the forest and counted all the specific Alpenkrähen, all the specific bears, and all the specific otters, and came back with a handwritten list and said basically we saw 15 otters, we saw 35 brown bears. And especially due to this handwritten character, even though the species were defined, the handwritten character introduces a lot of a lot of the problems we identified earlier, as there were using also common names or scientific names or appropriations of those, basically. So what was our approach? Our approach was quite straightforward. We used GPT-4o with simple prompt engineering. In this case, we tried two approaches, by one without giving a lot of context and one giving a lot of context. So both got the context, you're a biodiversity expert. But in the second one, we also provided a time and age of when the data was collected, which we then compared the performance in matching the identified historic common names to modern day common names, and identifying the historic scientific names to modern day scientific names. And the great part about the data set from Rehbein et al. From 2024 was that they also already had done this matching by hand. The experts from the Botanical Garden here in Berlin had done all this matching by hand, so we could directly compare the performance of our model by identifying these terms compared to the experts. And this is a little example here. So on the left, you see the German names, and then you see the English predictions with context, without context, and then the annotated the human annotations. So in this case, the first one is the bear, directly with context is also identified as bear, without context is also identified as bear, and annotated was brown bear. So this is something we classified as a partial hit, a partial success. So it was, while it was directly, it is going in the right direction, it's not completely correct. And in this, you already see, for example, that murmeltier, so the marmot, is directly, even though we have this little spelling variation there, is without any problem identified to the modern common names and also the modern scientific names, which is not displayed in this chart here. You can also already see that we see little highlighted here, and a little bit of sidetrack, we see difference between the context and without the context. As for example, we can see in the Trappe, which is a bustard, and we see here a great bustard identified with context, and truffle incorrectly identified without no context. Yeah, coming to the result, it was actually, we were really surprised. GPT-4o, without any fine tuning, just by prompt engineering, was then able to identify 91% of the modern scientific names correctly, which was an outstanding result considering that, again, the model just worked from scratch. The common names were a little bit less accurate, but still had a very impressive 68% of correct hits. Here also, as you see in the table below, there were, if you would consider the partially, like the completely wrong was only 5%, and we have a 25% with partly right, which is, for example, a brown bear instead of, so it predicted bear instead of brown bear. So if you are a little bit more generous, this statistic would also be way higher. If you're not, 68% with context is still a very impressive result out of the stand. In general, we can see that performance is increased with historical context, even though we just give such a small historical context. We see that spelling differences were not a problem. We see that in general, it was way better to, way easier to identify the scientific names. And we also saw, in regards to the third problem I mentioned earlier, we saw that the model is even able to make best guesses basically on more specified concepts. So, for example, if in the history the model had it, if in the historic document it said duck, the scientific name that was suggested was Anas Platyhund. Please apologize, a very specific, very common breed of duck in Bavaria. So it was even able to apply the contextual knowledge to identify the best fittings, more specific concepts. Really, of course, we can't count that as right, as this is not proven, but it is really interesting to see that it is able to go even more specific and has included knowledge about biodiversity, species and distributions within Germany, at least in this case, as far as we're aware. So yeah, in general, the limitations is this was a very small data set. So we had only 44 species, and a lot of them, most of them honestly did not change significantly with one of those three problems we identified earlier. We also, we did not have a direct link in the prototype we built. There's no direct link to an official taxonomy yet, even though all the scientific names that were identified are directly included in the ontologies, and the link is not, like, in that sense, a big next step, but it is not there. Also, of course, we only used one model, and we used a closed source model, which we would love to extend further to an open source model. And it is also not easy, as always with large language models, to identify why certain mistakes happened. Also, it needs to be mentioned that what we do still needs human evaluation. So while we can, in our opinion, which is also not, we haven't done any tests, but we can support the annotation of these data sets and transition into a more modern day, there is no, there's still a human in the loop needed, which we also think is important to ensure quality. Conclusion of user works, we showed that large language models can significantly aid historical taxonomy standardization. We showed that performance improves with context. We want to use more open source models, fine-tuning, and actually direct linking to the taxonomies. And in general, we want to enhance biodiversity databases and improve conversation efforts about it. Not so many sources here. And yeah, thank you very much for your time on the platform.
Hi, my name is Rick Overkleeft. It's not so much a question, but more comment. So I'm from Leiden, and I know that somebody at the University of Leiden has done approximately the same for the last 10 years on Dutch data, archaeological data. And since you're not here, otherwise I would personally move to you and say, hey, do you know this person? So I would just like to make another type of network and say, hey, do you know Alex Branson from the University of Leiden? So he worked the last 10 years on the same topic.
I don't know him, but it sounds great, and I will for sure reach out. Alex
So hi, I have a question regarding the accuracy of your data. So you mentioned that this data was acquired by foresters from in 1850 or so. So very, very long. I mean, I don't know how well they are. Are they really? I mean, can you trust that these species they report are really the species you are how to say collecting? So they are not biologists. I know this because I was participating on many biological excursions, and sometimes species are very, very hard to distinguish. And how well can you trust your data? And I mean, of course, a bear is different to a mammoth. There's no doubt about it. But if it's a special kind of crow, that could be quite difficult to distinguish. So what is your impression there?
So yeah, that's of course, especially with historical data, the reliability and stuff like this is always a big challenge and a big question. In this case, I would say the personnel that were doing the collection were like full-time employed, in German it's called Förster. So they are people who are in charge of their piece of nature by the state king already at that time. So we assumed that within this data set there's a quite high accuracy, especially considering that lots of these species are basically main important species. But in general, you're completely right. There is no, these people did not have anything to the same level of education we have in identifying species. And still today, we're making mistakes in this field. So especially now that historical data are getting, if they are getting more accessible, we need to even more consider biases and straight up errors within the data. I completely agree. I did not, I'm not a biodiversity expert, and I did not collect the data or digitalize it. But in conversation with with the institutes who did that, I think they are quite reliable in this case. I have the impression that this was people who were dedicating their whole life to monitor basically the level of these to monitor these specific parts of lands in Bavaria. And they were basically they're local experts, and this was their livelihood. So I think, yeah.